I think that it is possible. The question is force. The question is, well, there's a couple things. One is I sometimes get pegged as the violence guy, and I'm not the violence guy. What I am is I believe in full spectrum resistance. I believe that we need it all. So every winter, starting in about a month, I'm going to go wading in the pond that's right out here and bringing frog eggs inside to raise them up to tadpoles and release them. And that's important to do. And it's important for people to work on rape crisis hotlines. And it's important for people to work while the system is standing. It's important for people to work for universal health care. It's important for people to work to try to shut down the U.S. military. All those things are important. So I believe we need it all. And one of the things I say all the time is one of the great things about everything being so messed up is no matter where you look, there's great work to be done. And so, I still recycle. I know that that's not sufficient, but so I don't sneer at people who recycle. I don't sneer at people who protest. I spoke by Skype at the Occupy DC, and I am going to speak in person at Occupy Oakland. And, I think that they don't go far enough, but that doesn't matter. It's great. I'm so glad that people are doing something. And so I don't believe in the revolution versus reform dichotomy. I have no problem with doing purely reform work. My problem is when the people doing the reform work don't see the importance of the revolutionary work. And my problem is also the people who see the importance of revolutionary work but don't see the importance of the reform work. Because if we all wait for the great glorious revolution, there's not going to be anything left. And if all we do is reform work, there's not going to be anything left. So having said that, I think it's really important to remember that those in power only understand one thing, which is force. And by force, I don't mean violence. I want to say one more thing too, which is the big divide is not between those who promote or will countenance militant action and those who... The big divide is not between those who think that violence may be acceptable in some circumstances and those who don't. The big divide is between those who do something and those who do nothing. Most people don't do anything. And I think it's great, and people need to get off their butts and do something. I'm excited about the Occupy Wall Street stuff, but honestly, more people care about the Detroit Tigers or the Louisiana State University Tigers than care about real tigers. And so I wish more people would do something. I want to back up for a second, by the way. I just want to tell people the smartest thing I ever did, which is, this is how I got started as an activist. In my mid-20s, I realized that I wasn't paying enough for gas, that I wasn't, I think at the time it was like 80 cents a gallon, and that doesn't cover the ecological costs by a long ways. So for every dollar I would spend on gas, I decided I would give $1 to an environmental organization, a local environmental organization, not like National Audubon Society or National Sierra Club, but instead a local group. And because all the local groups just starved for money, but I didn't have any money myself. So alternatively, I would pay myself $5 an hour to do activism. Because the problems are so big, it's like, how do you even get started? And this was great because at the time I might get 1 tank of gas a week and it would cost me about $10. Okay, that means I have to do 2 hours worth of activism. And I can do that. So I would, start by writing letters to the editor, or I went to do some anti-fur demonstrations and some anti-circus demonstrations. And, I didn't know anything. I didn't let my ignorance get in the way of anything. Because how do you learn? You got to start somewhere. So I went to the anti-circus demo, and I didn't make a sign. Somebody would come up and get all mad at me and say, "Why are circuses bad?" It's like, I don't know, talk to the guy next to me. Somebody would come up and get all mad at me and say, "Why are circuses bad?" It's like, I don't know, talk to the guy next to me. And it was great. And I started having so much fun that I started going to a lot of protests, and then I went from there to doing timber sale appeals, and I just started having more and more fun with it, and it's great, and it felt really alive. So I want to be really clear that I'm not some sort of hard-nosed person that, we all need to jump into the revolution right away. We all have roles to play. Okay, so now I want to get back to the force thing. Frederick Douglass really said it very clearly when he talked about how power concedes nothing without demand. And when I say force, that doesn't have to be that doesn't have to be violence. You know, Gene Sharp has written about this a lot. That if you have the numbers, you can accomplish a lot, but that's still using force. And you know, the French strike back last winter, really showed this. That the French went on strike, and they did it. They didn't just strike at random places. They would strike in front of oil terminals. They thought strategically, and so doing, they were able to shut down the French economy. And when the French government then opened up their strategic reserve, they went to strike and blockade that. And they had the numbers to do it. If you don't have the numbers, you've got to find a way to get leverage. I mean, we could shut down this entire system with, you know, if we had the numbers to do a continuous blockade of, you know, the Keystone Pipeline route, you know, we could blockade it, and not just a symbolic one-day blockade, but if you had 200,000 people, you could shut it down by having just rolling waves of people blockading. You know, it's like, do you know who the best environmental president of the last 60 years was, really? It's Richard Nixon, for crying out loud. You know, Richard Nixon was the one who put in the Endangered Species Act, Clean Water Act, NEPA, NFMA, all those great laws. And he did it because he did it because of Watergate. And because people were protesting against the wars, people protesting against all sorts of stuff, massive protests. And then also Watergate had him scared. So he wanted to divert attention and actually do something really good, you know, to try to mollify people so he could stay in office. It wasn't because he was an environmentalist. He wasn't. He was pretty bad. But he actually did good things because he was forced to. And that's not sufficient. But I'm doing a talk in Chico, California on Saturday, two days from now. And the first question that they're asking me is, what do we want? Do we know what we want? And I think that's the first question that we really need to ask. Well, what I want is I want to live in a world that has more wild salmon every year, which means I want to live in a world without dams, because you can't have dams and salmon too. I want to live in a world that has more migratory songbirds every year. And I want to live in a world that has less dioxin, which means you can't have plastics. And so the question was, do I believe it will require force? It will require force of some sort. Do I believe it will require violent force? I wish we had the numbers to make it so we could shut it down without using violent force. And I also know that when people talk about violence, one of the things that they often don't talk about is the fact that there are between 500,000 and 10 million children die every year as a direct result of capitalism. This is around the world. It's because of colonialism. But we don't, you know, so when people do talk, and I know you're not doing this, but when people do talk about violence, they don't talk about the structural violence. They don't talk about the violence that's flowing down the hierarchy. They don't talk about the fact that there are 200 species who are driven extinct today. They don't talk about the fact that the ice caps are melting. And those in power, they look at that not with horror, but instead with lust. They're really excited the ice caps are melting because this opens up a lot more areas to resource exploitation. And that tells you everything you need to know about whether it's going to be a voluntary transformation.